So welcome everyone. I think when we get on to the presentation, it would probably be quite good if we could all mute and let Lisa speak, and then we can get on to Q&A. If there's questions that people come to mind, it might be useful to put them in chat, and what I'll do is I'll save the chat as well so that we've got a record of those, because we might not be able to get through all questions, so we'll see how we go. What other things perhaps to bear in mind? So Lisa, how long do you want to talk for?
I think it will be roughly 20 minutes.
Okay, 20 minutes, that's great. And then we've got a good chunk of time for sort of Q&A. I think my understanding, I mean, it was Jonathan Waxman who had the idea of the meeting, but my understanding is the purpose of this meeting is to hear from you about your research, to understand what it's telling us. And I personally would be quite interested to see how that fits within the research program, the energy system modeling program of work that you're engaged in with the rest of the team. I think that might be quite nice to hear about a little bit about that, if you can, perhaps after you finish the presentation. And then if we can sort of try and keep the questions, keep them related to the presentation, try to avoid diving off into too many, there's so many different subjects that we could dive off into. So I think anything else? Jonathan, anything else you wanted to add, or? No? Okay, so let's, we've got one comment in the chat, so sure. Okay, so we'll look at the chat a bit later. Yeah. So Lisa, do you want to, we just perhaps just do a quick round of introductions, just a name and affiliation perhaps, or role and affiliation? So do you want to start with Bruno?
Yeah, hi everyone. Really nice to be here. I only heard about this meeting yesterday. I'm glad I didn't miss it. So I'm a senior researcher at University of Nottingham.
Okay, great. I seem to be next on my grid.
Can I maybe just ask, are you like an energy system modeler, or what kind of research, just that I also know what I should focus on?
I am, yes, energy system modeler, mostly electricity grid, but I'm slowly transitioning into heat networks as well.
Okay.
So I'm Richard Erskine. I'm retired. I'm a fellow of the Schumacher Institute. I'm really interested in change around community action groups and translating research into communicable messages for the general public as well as councillors and so forth. Jonathan?
Jonathan Waxman. I am a wind farm developer and owner. I'm interested in all the pathways that are necessary for us to get to net zero. And I've become interested the last couple of years, particularly in heating, which has been a bit of a Cinderella sector for the UK journey to net zero. So I became very interested in heat pumps. So, and I read a lot of the work that your group does and other system modeling work.
Yeah. So Chris Twin.
Okay. Thank you, Jonathan, for the invitation. Chris Twin, independent design consultant in the construction industry, here representing LETI. So LETI is a volunteer organisation of professionals across the UK and beyond. We prepared a climate emergency design guide a couple of years ago, and we've done various things on hydrogen and so forth with regard to trying to inform practitioners. And currently I am leading LETI's retrofit, current retrofit stream, which is looking at residential, how many, how deep, at what cost are the key questions.
Thanks, Chris. We'll get on to you in a minute, Lisa. Lewis?
Hi everyone, Lewis Bowick. I work in the Energy Systems Catapult, and I am focused on local area energy planning. So we're doing a lot of cost optimization of heat electrification against building fabric upgrades, renewable supply, that sort of thing. So this is very interesting to me.
Great. Nicola? Are you on mute, Nicola?
Sorry, Cambridge Energy and Cambridge Architectural Research, and also local action groups in Cambridge. I'm not a systems modeler, I'm a sort of building energy modeler, but this whole issue about how much to insulate before you install the heat pump is absolutely, everybody's talking about it.
And you've done quite a lot of work for government, haven't you? Things like the code study for BEIS.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I did most of the modelling for the code study, which is cost optimal domestic electrification, but that was done from the household point of view only.
Yeah.
And you know, BEIS said, don't look at the system, just look at the household stuff. So we looked at the household prices, and it's really interesting how that relates to the system.
Yeah. Richard, the other Richard.
I'm Richard Lowes. I'm a senior associate at the Regulatory Assistance Project, which is a think tank that works on energy policy, and I lead the work on European heat decarbonisation at RAP, also a research fellow at X University. Very interested in all things heat pumps and energy efficiency. In particular, I'm currently working on some analysis for the Irish government, which is looking to try and loosen their requirements for heat pump grants. So currently they have an efficiency requirement that's quite strict, and we're producing some analysis to support them in either removing or reducing that requirement.
Great. Jason, can you unmute yourself and introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Jason Palmer. I work with Nicola Terry at Cambridge Energy, Cambridge Architectural Research. I'm also a buildings energy researcher.
Great. Will?
Hi, we're here with Chris as representing Letty. I'm also a building energy modeler, professional. You know, we're a company. I suppose I describe Letty as professional activism. So we're trying to, as building professions, push our profession to work harder in the climate emergency, and part of that is bringing some thought on practicality from experienced professionals and meeting it with sort of academia to come up with sort of pragmatic things quickly that we can disseminate through Letty. So that's our sort of interest.
Great. And last but not least, Jan. Can you unmute yourself and introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Sorry for being last. I had another thing that I needed to take care of, but I'm here now. I'm the European Director at RAP, the Regulatory Assistance Project, working with Richard and a team of 21 people now, I think, on a whole range of topics, ranging from heat, but also transport, power systems, networks, etc., at both sort of national and European level.
Great. We seem to have a very late fly in here, Dominic, but I don't know if he's going to. Dominic, can you hear me? Maybe not. Okay. Well, maybe we'll get back to Dominic.
Yes.
So yes, can we all mute ourselves and then let Lisa introduce herself and proceed with the presentation?
All right, then thanks all of you for introducing yourself and having me, giving me the opportunity to kind of show what we have done in this research paper. I'm a PhD student in the energy system modeling group of Professor Brown. We are based in Berlin, and we are all developing an open source energy system modeling tool called PIPESA. And we do have like an electricity and also a sector coupled model, which is called for Europe, which is called PIPESA EURSEC, and with which this study was also conducted. And in this study, we had to look on the space heat demand peaks in buildings in a future highly renewable European energy system. And as the title already said, we focused on Europe. As far as I understood from your introduction, most of you are interested in the UK or into mostly national models, and we had a look on on all of Europe in the study. Also, I try to have an eye on the chat, but also feel free to interrupt me if anything is unclear to you. So just let me move the, okay. So if we do have, like today, the heating sector accounts for a large share of the CO2 emissions, which we do have in Europe. And therefore, obviously, it plays like an important role if we want to reduce our emissions and get to like a carbon neutral system. For example, most houses today are using oil or gas boilers, and many scenarios to reach like net zero emissions rely on electrification in the heating sector. So instead of having a gas or oil boiler, one would have a heat pump.
Sorry, Lisa,
yeah.
We've lost your presentation, or it's just me.
All of you?
Right?
Okay.
Yeah, we've lost it, yeah.
Oh, that's bad. Then let me just stop sharing and sharing again.
Don't worry about monitoring the chat. We'll get to that at the end, Lisa.
All right. Yeah. You see my screen again? Yes. Okay, great. And this electrification of the heating sector is quite challenging because then like both demand and supply depend on the weather. Imagine we have like a cold winter day with not a lot of wind, not a lot of solar feed in. At the same time, because of the cold temperatures, we would have a very high heating demand. And second, the heating demand is very seasonal, so we want to heat our houses in winter times. But in summer, we don't really need that much heat. And if we want to have like a highly renewable system, we would have many generation capacities, which would be only used in winter times, but not in the summer. Yeah, and in this little graphic, you can see this as a little example. The heating demand in the winter months is much higher in Europe. So what we wanted to do in this study is first have a look, okay, which influence actually do have peaks which we have in winter times on the total system costs, but also on the composition of the European energy system. And which instruments could we use to mitigate those heat demand peaks? And we wanted to co-optimize both at the same time. So the costs for heat supply on one hand, and also the costs for efficiency measures on the other hand. There are many studies looking on either one of the sides, but we wanted to have like a combined look on both. So just a quick introduction to the model which we are using. So it's a sector coupled model, so it does include the heating sector, the transport sector, and the power sector for this study. And we covered all of Europe with hourly temporal resolution, roughly like 1 node per country. Except for a few countries where we have, where we do expect to have like electricity bottlenecks, which we modeled in a higher spatial resolution. And we do look on different energy carriers, so electricity, methane, hydrogen, biomass, and there's interaction also between those energy carriers. So for example, you can satisfy the heat demand by power to heat technologies like heat pumps or resistive heaters. The transport demand can be covered either by hydrogen cars or electric vehicles, and they can also feed back to the electricity grid by vehicle to grid. And we do co-optimize at the same time, like the dispatch, but also the installed capacities for storage, transmission, and generation capacities. Just because I saw the question, so the whole model is open source. So all the code and the data can be used already now. So we just have like a closer look how the heating sector is modeled, because that's also what this study is focused on. We did consider 4 different energy carriers, biomass, hydrogen, methane, and electricity. We do have the heating demand subdivided into district heating according to today's district heating share, and then individual heating. And the individual heating is further split up into urban areas and rural areas, which are again split up into residential and service sector. And we did consider different heating technologies, which can provide the heat, which are CHPs, both biomass and gas boilers, air and ground heat pumps, solar thermal, and for the individual heating, we have like some additional costs accounting for the distribution grid for the electricity and the methane. What we generally do in our model is we do minimize the total system costs including the operational and the annualized capital costs for one district year under certain constraints. And for this study, we constrained the CO2 emissions to be net zero.
Could I ask you a quick question, Lisa?
Yeah, sure.
You've got annualized capital costs there.
Yes.
And at the back of the supplementary information, you've got the capital costs tabulated and the lifetime of each of the energy sources tabulated. Yes. Is the annualized capital costs just one divided by the other?
It's discounted. So
like an LCOE type measure.
Yeah, exactly. So it depends a bit on the It depends a bit on the technology, but normally we assume a discount rate of 7%.
Thank you.
It's also, I can share it with you after the presentation. We kind of have like a GitHub repository, which is called technology data, where we save all our cost assumptions for every technology every year, including investment costs, fixed operational costs, marginal costs, discount rate, lifetime efficiencies. So to mitigate those heat demand peaks, we basically looked on 3 different instruments. We looked on one hand on thermal energy storage, where we did consider 2 different types, one for short and another for long-term storage. Backup gas boilers, which you could use like in a form of hybrid heating as a backup for the heat pumps, and building renovation in a form of additional insulation material and replacing inefficient windows. Since here are a few building system modelers, we have done this like really on a high country level. So we didn't look on specific single buildings, but kind of built energy cost curves for whole countries. Those cost curves we built depending on age, insulation state, and building types for each country based on the hot maps data set. And we determined some energy cost curves, so how much euro per square meter would I have to invest to save this amount of energy. And we added that to the model in 2 possible renovation measures, like one moderate one and then one more expensive, more ambitious one. And we have done this for every country, but also for every sector. So the cost curves for the residential sector would look different than the one for the service sector, just based on the building state. And we compared in 8 scenarios the effects of the 3 balancing tools. So we tried to, we covered all possible combinations of those 3 tools, which were like the backup gas boilers, the thermal energy storage, and the building renovation. And if you look on the graph on the left side, like the flexible scenario includes all 3 tools, while the rigid scenario on the right side includes none of them, and in between are all the other possible combinations. And if we do have those balancing instruments, like the overall costs are reduced by 17%, and the most cost-effective tool to really reduce the total system costs is the building renovation, which are basically all 4 bars on the left side in this plot. And if we do have building renovation, basically the gas boilers in rural areas weren't used anymore, and one could remove them. And one other important finding was that as soon as we do have building renovation, we do need less generation capacity. So we do need less, for example, onshore or offshore wind farms, just because the electricity demand is lower, because a large part of the heating sector is electrified. And that could avoid public acceptance problems. Here we can look at one example week on how like the heating supply would look like. On the left column, we do have the rigid scenario without any balancing instruments. On the right side, the flexible scenario with all the balancing instruments. And on the first glance, we can see that especially in individual heated areas, it's very cost efficient to have a lot of building renovation and to reduce the heating demand. In district heating areas, not that much, because there are large scale generation possibilities, which make it quite cheap to supply the heat. And then building renovation is less attractive. And we can also see that in the middle plot, where we do have like this hybrid heating option with gas boilers, that the gas boilers really jump in at peak demand times.
Sorry, Lisa, I read the paper. I didn't understand this graph at all. Could you just step through it slightly more slowly?
Yeah, sure.
What's going on there?
Yeah, sure. So the blue line, the thick blue line is the heating demand. For each column, we do have a different scenario. So the first column here is a scenario where we don't have any balancing instruments. The right column, the flexible, we have all. And then the heating demand in our model is divided into first individual heating, which are the first 4, and district heating, which is the last one. For each heat demand area, we do allow different technologies. So for example, in district heating, you have the option to use CHPs, while in rural areas, you have ground heat pumps, for example. You also have heat pumps in district heating, but not the ground heat pumps. And below the blue line, which is the demand, you can see how the demand is satisfied. So which technology kind of supplies in this area in this given time, which is like a week in January, the heating demand. And we can see, like, for example, in rural areas, most of the heating demand is covered by ground heat pumps. And if we do have some heat demand peaks and the option of using hybrid heating, also a bit by gas boilers, if we don't have building renovation. In urban areas which are individually heated, which are those rows here, the third and the fourth one. Mainly air heat pumps are used. If there's the option, also the hybrid heating with gas boilers is used if you don't have building renovation, and there's thermal energy storage used, which is the black area. We can already see that in the individual heated area, the blue line is much lower, which means here the heating demand is reduced, and that's because of building renovation.
I mean, massively reduced.
Yes.
Okay.
And in the district heating areas, we don't see such a large change with building renovation. Thermal energy storage is used for sure if there's the option, but since it's quite cheap to supply the heat, it rather just electrifies the heating sector, but doesn't use the option to renovate the buildings.
That's clear now, thank you.
Okay. So on average, we have seen that between like around 50% of the space heating demand is saved, but we do see strong differences depending on the country. So, and this demand, like this difference on how much building renovation we do see in each country, on the one hand, really depends on what is the state of the building stock in the corresponding country. So how much would it cost to renovate the buildings compared to how much energy I can save? But it also depends on how much does it cost to supply the energy. For example, if you do look on England, we don't see like that large heat demand savings. So we don't see a large renovation rate, even though the building stock is not like in a super great state. But that's because like the electricity prices are very low, because in Great Britain we do have a large potential for on and offshore wind, which supplies also in winter times electricity to a quite low price, and therefore it's cheaper to keep the buildings the way they are in many areas, and just to electrify the heating sector and use the cheap electricity. And this is also what is shown in the upper right graph here, where we show the electricity prices depending on the country, and also compared between the blue, the rigid scenario without any balancing measures, and the flexible scenario where we do have building renovation, thermal energy storage, and hybrid heating. And we can see that first, like the electricity prices are much lower as soon as we do have the mitigating tools, but also that there's a large difference between the countries. And we can also see the seasonality in the electricity prices in the lower plot, where we really can see those peak prices where we do have a high heating demand in winter times. So we did include costs for strengthening the grid as well. And nuclear power is not part of this mix here. It wouldn't be, so this is a greenfield optimization. I haven't mentioned it in the beginning, so it doesn't consider existing power plant capacities. But if we add the option to build nuclear, it wouldn't be built because it's not cost competitive compared to solar or onshore wind, at least if we allow them to be expanded up to their technical potential. One could imagine, let's say we make a scenario where we assume there isn't enough public acceptance to build out onshore or offshore wind to the amount which we see, and we limit the maximum capacity for on and offshore wind, then it might be that the nuclear power would be used, but otherwise it wouldn't in our model.
Lisa, may I ask a question, please, on this one?
Sure.
So thanks. I'm just looking at the UK and knowing how relatively inefficient the building stock is, so slightly surprised by this one. I wonder, do you know what the assumption for district heating is in the UK? Because if what you said on the previous slide, whereby in denser areas there's more district heating and you're less worried about costs, is there a high assumed proportion of district heating in the UK?
Yeah, so the district heating is assumed according to 2 days district heating share.
Okay.
So there's no increase assumed. We have done some sensitivity about it. So the low renovation in England is really caused by the cheap electricity prices, which we get in our model.
Okay, thanks.
The prices aren't exactly cheap, most people would argue, and they're not fantastically cheap. But what really shocks me is the difference in winter and summer prices in that chart. I mean, if those kinds of price differences arise, it completely changes the entire sector. Everything we ever knew about trading on energy is completely wrong.
Yes. I mean, today it's different because a large part of the heating sector is not electrified. But if you look, for example, to France, where they do have already a large electrification of the heating sector, you can actually really see those price spikes depending on the temperature.
I think that gets quite interesting I think we think a lot at the moment in terms of energy being a flat price year round, when we're thinking about the savings from, let's say, solar thermal, which will be dominant in summer. And it gets quite interesting if you start to see a big seasonal swing in the value of energy, the cost of energy.
So you're talking now about energy costs as if wind is cheap, which it ought to be. But at the moment, the energy prices are all marginal. Based on the capacity of the cost of the next thing that has to go on the grid, and it's all related to gas. So,
can I suggest, Lisa? I don't know how many more slides you've got, because this is a very important question that's being raised here, and I just wondered whether you just need to park it for a few minutes and then get back to it.
Maybe we pause it. I quickly go through the slides, and then you can pick the things. The most
I'm just concerned you get to finish your presentation.
And then we can go back. So we did like a little thought experiment in this research paper, where we kind of assumed, instead of having like the seasonal profile, which you can see up here, and which I also showed at the beginning, where we do have like a high heating demand in winter times and a lower one in summer times, where we mainly use it for like hot water supply. Assume the same overall annual heating demand, but we distribute it flatly throughout the whole year, which is shown like in the lower two plots down here. And we just compared like what are the effects on our tools we looked at and on the total system costs. And we saw that 30% of the total system costs are just caused by those heat demand peaks. So this is a bit related also to the spiking electricity prices we've seen before. And it shows how important it is to really also model those transitions with a high temporal resolution, because it's not about saving energy, it's really about avoiding those peak demand points. And as soon as we did assume like a flat heat demand, also the need for building renovation was strongly reduced, as well as for backup gas boilers and the thermal energy storage. And we have done a lot of sensitivity, which is also in the appendix. And I just teaser a few scenarios here, and I'm happy to discuss also some of them, depending on your interest. So we looked on different costs for retrofitting. I already saw in the chat the question about what if we don't have a high public acceptance for building renovation, for example. It sort of could correspond to having a higher renovation price. because then also there would be less building renovation, and we can see the effects on the overall system. We looked at different weather years, and we also looked on an increased share of district heating. And what is probably interesting for you, but I haven't included it here, we restricted the wind potential. And then we could see, for example, for England, that the building renovation rate was much higher if we don't allow that much on and offshore wind farms. So I'm coming to my conclusion slide, and then I'm happy to discuss with you whatever you're interested in. So we saw in this research that up to 30% of the total system costs are really caused just by the heat demand peaks, and that building renovation is really the largest lever to reduce the overall costs. And if we do have building renovation, we don't really see gas distribution or gas boilers in individual buildings anymore. And those investments into building renovation, they're really driven because we need to reduce the peak demand. And it's not about reducing the overall energy consumption, but really about the timing. And Richard asked the question if I can share the slides, and of course I can.
Can I chip in perhaps with a first question? Our costs of energy, as Nicola sort of mentioned, are creating some very large distortions in the market. And one of the things that seems to be coming out is our energy costs seem to be converging more with international prices, not the cost of generation price. And therefore, the more we have, for example, interconnectors into between electrical grids in Europe and UK, which was originally intended as a way of getting some extra peak capacity if we're shifted compared with when peaks happen in Europe. But conversely, that means that our cheaply produced electricity can be sold into Europe for more profit than selling it locally. So we are ending up with some very interesting potential alternative distortions to the market. What would your views on some of that be?
Okay. I think in general, like the system, so if we do have a carbon neutral system, which is really highly relying on renewables, we definitely benefit all of having either a sector coupled model, a better transmission between the countries, just to smooth out those spatial and temporal variance. And I would say that the UK would definitely profit of having more interconnections also to Europe for selling the electricity, and also to have a backup in case of low wind potentials in England.
So, so Lisa, did you get to the end of your presentation? I wasn't quite sure.
Yeah,
I did. Okay, great. Yeah. So there's a number. Have you seen any questions before people speak? Is there anything on the chat that we need to pick up on? I think you mentioned you covered the nuclear one, didn't you? And yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah, you've covered the interconnection. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. Maybe just concerning the last question. So what we are looking at is really minimizing the total system costs. We don't look on the costs of individual households. So it might be that for an individual household, it's not cost beneficial to renovate the building, but for the whole system it would be. And what one can learn from this kind of research is where would we need policy support? Because for an individual house owner, it wouldn't be necessarily worth it to renovate the building, but since the whole system benefits from it, where would we need support?
Yeah. So we cut off. There was a question earlier from Nicola. So can we go back to Nicola's question? Nicola, do you want to restate your question?
Well, I'm just, gosh, what was my question? I've got another one which is related.
Well, I think it was, you felt it was turning the whole, I think you felt that it was actually having a fundamental challenge to our current.
Absolutely. It sounds like, and well, the cost of energy is driven by the limitation in supply, and the marginal cost, and so it kind of rises to match the cost of reducing it. I'm not an economist, so it's not the cost of supply; it's the cost of reducing demand that is actually making the energy prices work. I mean, here in the UK, we're used to having things like, you know, economy said nighttime low energy prices and that sort of thing. But looking at your graphs, there isn't going to be any of that because it's going to be whopping prices all the way through the winter, especially if you have a little bit of thermal energy storage in there. So everything we know about the energy markets is going to be completely different. I've had another question which does relate to this.
Shall we just deal with that one first?
Okay.
See if Lisa has a response.
Yeah, so I mean, it was more like a statement, right? That the way how the electricity prices are working right now is going to change in a future system, and that's as I said before, that's something what we already see, for example, in France, where a large part of the heating sector is electrified, and we do see those peak prices in winter times.
Right.
And sorry, no,
that's fine. Yeah. I just wondered, Nicola, can you come back with your question in a minute? Just make sure that everyone gets one dib. If anyone is is anyone else wanting to ask a question? Or should we just let Nicola get on with it? Jan, do you have anything?
Can I just answer also the question in the chat, because it's still related to the cost?
Okay, yeah, sorry.
So, I guess Nicola asked as well, like, since we are optimizing with perfect foresight, which means we already do see, or the optimization do see ahead the whole year with all the weather data, which obviously is not how it works in reality. How close are we actually to the real costs, which we would have with a limited foresight? And we haven't done a publication yet, but we had a master thesis who had a look at it, running a model with a rolling horizon and a limited foresight, and it was very close actually to the costs which we see here.
I had a question in relation to that.
Yeah.
In the supplementary information, and you showed a graph about this, there are different results in different years.
Yes.
In 2010, we had some very cold, windless periods, and that drove, I think, much higher cost than in 2012, when there was a better correlation between low temperature and strong wind output.
Yeah.
Reduce the system. Is it are you making a greenfield optimization in each of those years?
Yes, exactly. So it depends a bit on your research question you are interested in. If you want to have a robust system, which works for different.
We would like a robust system.
or you're interested in the results of a robust system, then you would like to run it with a really challenging weather year, where we maybe have like a large period of a high heating demand and low solar and wind feed in.
Yes.
But if you want to have a look, for example, on the average energy prices, it's better to take like an average weather year, just to get like a more realistic assumption about that.
But just to be clear,
just a minute, Jonathan, can we get round? Is there something quick you want to ask, or should we get round the others as well?
Let's go around the others.
Yeah. So Will, I think you had your hand raised.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, I feel a bit embarrassed because we haven't seen the paper, so it feels like other people might have reviewed it and this might be in there. I wondered, in terms of retrofit, there's a huge sort of range of retrofit, and I just wondered what sort of scale you'd assumed. You had some percentage reductions in there. Where does the model fall in terms of the optimum percentage reduction, or probably more usefully, do you have a sort of kilowatt hour per square meter heat demand figure or something around those lines?
Yeah, so there is something in the supplementary material. It depends on the country and the building stock state. So we basically did assume 2 different levels for each country and each sector, like one ambitious and one moderate renovation level. And we fixed the renovation of like the additional insulation material for the outside envelope, so for the roof, for the wall, and for the floor. There isn't like an optimization which just checks if it's only worth it, for example, to renovate the roofs. It's like a combined renovation, and inefficient windows are replaced from a certain U value on. It's more specific in the supplementary material, and it depends on the country. I mean, we can have a quick look. So there's like the moderate renovation would save down to 40% of the heating demand, and the ambitious down to 20% in average.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Tim? Sort of. Yeah. Will.
Yeah, I'm sure, like, if you are normally modeling just the building sector, you have like a much more detailed model. But since we looked like on whole countries and the whole building stock of a country, it was really like rather a broad to find some cost estimates on renovating.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Thank you. Yeah, I think
I see a hand up. Jason has got a hand up.
Thanks. Yeah. So on this question, going back a bit, the question of who pays and separation between householder incentives, government incentives, energy company incentives, and that difficulty leading us to suboptimal solutions. In the UK, the recent historical approach has been to leave as much as we can to the market, and basically to accept that, okay, if energy prices go up, then that will have a knock-on effect on consumers. Householders will invest more heavily if and when energy prices increase. I think it's true that in other European countries, there's much more kind of centralized planning and more government control and intervention in markets to make sure we avoid suboptimal solutions. And I'm pretty sure you're arguing that that's an appropriate standpoint, that what should be happening is government should be making use of studies like yours and your kind of modelling to inform decisions about where we ought to be, working out what the optimal position is, the optimal combination of different measures, and then coming up with legislation that leads you towards those solutions. Is that a fair, Pressy?
Yeah, that's exactly our approach. So we don't assume in our study any subsidies, any taxes. We just want to find like the cost optimal for the whole system, and then you can kind of derive from that what kind of subsidies and support from the policy we would need to reach this cost optimal state.
So
okay,
yeah. Just keeping an eye on the time. It would be quite useful to have a few minutes at the end, Lisa, for you perhaps to describe where this fits within the wider research and where you see this going. But we've still got about 5 minutes for questions. So, Jan, do you have a question?
No, I thought we're going to hear from Nicola as well. So
Yeah. Okay, Nicola, do you want to come back with your other question?
I have a little question in the chat.
Okay.
it's about the storage. I mean, I'm a little bit surprised because it seems, well, you model two kinds of storage: long term, which is 180-day half-life, and short term, which is 3-day half-life. And none of these diagrams indicate how much you have of each or anything. I just wondered what sort of role the long term was making, because I don't know how we'd actually supply it.
So overall, the possibility to have the thermal energy storage was, like, from the three instruments, the one which had like the lowest impact on the total system costs. So if we compare, for example, in this graphic here, the right bar where we don't have any mitigating tools compared to the one left where we do have thermal energy storage, we only see like 3% saving if you do have the storage. And mainly the long-term storage was used during winter times to balance out like periods where we do have a low feed-in of renewables.
What was that long-term storage? What was the mechanism for? Was that synth gas or biogas, or what was that?
No, it's hot water storage.
Oh, hot water storage. Sorry, I beg your pardon. Yeah. Jonathan, you have another question? I might treat myself.
I just wondered, per what Jan said, I wonder if we have a few minutes for Nicola and Jason just to present their somewhat different results, looking from the kind of bottom up rather than the top down. It'll be interesting for Lisa to hear what Nicola and Jason found.
I don't know if it might be quite challenging in the minutes we have, but
but I'm definitely interested, just because Chris asked another question about the district heating. So we did assume in the main district heating share, and then we had like some sensitivity where we increased the district heating share, and we added some costs for the district heating. I can't remember the exact numbers, but they should be in the supplementary material.
Yeah.
Thanks, Lisa.
I mean, I just wanted to quickly ask a question, because your finding for the UK, which was coming out about sort of 10% of heat reduction, wasn't it, for the UK?
Yeah.
It was a very light colour. And that's similar to the number that the balanced pathway in the 6th carbon budget of the Climate Change Committee, 12% they came with. And yet, if you look at Letty and others who are very concerned about comfort and obviously the individual situation, a lot of that is driving towards sort of 50 kilowatt hours per meter squared per year, which is more like a 50 to 60% reduction in heat. So, you know, there's a mismatch. And what concerns me is we've got these parallel conversations going. So I'm just interested about whether your program will be trying to look at those, or are you just focused on the system level, or are you going to try and do some of that bottom-up stuff to sort of try and resolve some of these conflicts in perspectives?
So we don't look on other benefits also from building renovation, which maybe you look at, which are like thermal comfort or a better health situation of the people who are living in those buildings, or noise cancellation. I mean, there are many other reasons beside like efficiency and costs, which speak for building renovation, which we do not consider. And we are, I think what we also showed with the study is really that it's important to look on both sides, like the costs of supply and the costs of efficiency measures. And it's we are always going to stay on this energy system perspective. We are not planning to include the bottom-up models, because then it would be probably too much detail to be run in one optimization, to run at the same time the energy cost supply optimization and the demand reduction. I mean, what one could do is, for example, we give our energy supply cost curves to a bottom up model, and then you could run your optimization with those energy costs.
Okay, yeah. Any thoughts, Nicola, on this?
Well, it's just such a different angle, really. Interestingly, with the code model, we were also using total costs, adding capital costs plus, operating costs over a short period. We only used 15 years because we thought that was about as far ahead as most households even can possibly think. And we started from archetypes which had a reasonable amount of insulation. So, they had cavity walls, it was insulated, they all had double glazing, and they all had some loft insulation. If it was solid walls, I was actually quite surprised to find that if it was a detached house with, two-party walls, even solid wall insulation wasn't necessarily actually cost effective in the time frame that we were looking at. With the increased prices that we've seen this year, things have changed a little bit, but it's not vastly different. But it is looking at the costs over 15 years. And one of the big benefits to the householders from the point of view of adding renovation is to keep those running costs low, which reduces your exposure to future energy prices. And that, I think, ought to be a serious consideration. So looking at total system costs is great at the system level, but actually from the householder, they really want to keep their running costs low so that they aren't scared of the future.
Right. I think we're kind of. I think it's time to sort of do a bit of a wind up, a bit of a finish. I've put my personal email address in the chat so that I'll make sure that if you email me, if I don't already have your email, I'll make sure you get the presentation. So I'll take that task on. Lisa, are you happy for this recording of this session to be shared?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, okay. So what I'll also do is I'll upload it to YouTube and provide a share link, again, in a return email. So if you're interested, send me an email. If you're not, then don't. So I'll just, I don't have all of your emails. I think some of you are additional to the original list I had. So anything else to add, Jonathan, before we close?
Just to thank Lisa really for a fantastic presentation.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the interest.
Real food for thought.
Yeah, and we're interested to see more research. So coming.
Yeah. All right.
Great.
Then thank you for having me, and have a nice evening.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. You too.
Thank you.